The Secret Between Me and My Friend's Mom. Part 1. The beginning. I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that feels both too long and too short. I was standing in line at the corner cafe, the one with the chipped counter and the playlist that always felt like someone else's memory. I'd been coming here for months, mostly because it was close to the apartment I rented above my friend's old building, and partly because it was quiet enough to pretend I wasn't thinking too much. She was there before me, leaning slightly against the counter, her fingers brushing the rim of her coffee cup. She didn't look up when I stepped in, but I noticed the way the sunlight caught her hair, soft, with threads of silver I'd never expect, like someone had quietly rewritten her age. "Hey, Simon," she said, almost like it slipped out before she could stop it. I froze, even though it was just my name. My coffee order hung in my throat. "The usual?" I nodded, surprised she remembered. It wasn't just my drink. It was that she knew me in some small, human way. Her eyes flicked to my hands as I pushed my wallet into my pocket, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The line moved slowly. I noticed how she folded the napkin under her cup, a tiny movement, deliberate. I wanted to say something, anything, but I let the silence stretch instead. There was something in that quiet, like it wasn't awkward but rather suspended. I found myself scanning the cafe as if to hide the fact I was staring. She laughed at something the barista said, a small, almost private laugh, and I imagined it was the soundtrack to her life outside of my observations. I wondered what it would be like to be part of it, or even just to sit nearby, without making it obvious I wanted more than just the order to be remembered. When she turned to leave, our eyes met again. I caught the briefest pause in her step, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I wanted to say, "See you later," but my voice stayed put. So I did what I usually did. I nodded, and she nodded back, the gesture heavier than either of us let on. Back at my apartment, I scrolled through my phone without really seeing the messages. Unsent texts lingered in the drafts folder. "Did you get home okay? And I noticed your hands today." Simple, stupid lines I could never press send on. My thumb hovered over them, then retreated. The clock ticked too loudly in the empty apartment, or maybe I just noticed it more because she wasn't there. I thought about calling her, about some excuse to hear her voice. But I didn't. I brewed coffee instead, the same routine, and found her face lingering in the steam. Then, just as I was about to push my own silence further, my phone buzzed. A text. From her. "Forgot my wallet at the cafe. Can you drop by?" I stared at it. The words were ordinary, but my chest pinched like they were something else entirely. I didn't know if I should be excited, nervous, or both. And just like that, a Tuesday that was meant to be ordinary became the kind of day that felt like it might tip into something I wasn't ready to name. Something secret. Something quiet, but important. I didn't reply right away. I didn't move. I just stared at the text, at the tiny circle that meant she was already waiting somewhere in the world, and I realized that whatever this was, it was starting now, whether I liked it or not. The Secret Between Me and My Friend's Mom. Part 2. The first encounter, I walked into the cafe, the air warm and smelling faintly of roasted beans. She was at the same table she always claimed as hers, now crouched over her bag, searching. I felt the weight of my own footsteps as if I was crossing a line I didn't fully understand. "Oh, Simon," she said, relief flickering across her face. "Thanks for coming." Her hands held the wallet like it was fragile, like she'd been bracing it against some unseen danger. I handed it over, careful not to brush her fingers more than necessary. She smiled, small and hesitant. "I sometimes leave things behind. I used to be better at remembering." I sat across from her without thinking, nodding like that was enough. And for a moment, we just existed in that quiet. The steam rising from our cups, the hum of the cafe, the occasional clink of spoons. "I used to come here a lot when I first moved back to the city," she said softly. It felt grounding. Everything else felt like it was spinning out of reach. She paused, and I realized she wasn't talking about coffee at all. Something in her tone made me think of all the times I'd stared at my phone, unsent texts, imagining conversations that never happened. I wanted to ask what spinning felt like now, but I didn't. I just listened. There was a strange risk in being here. She was my friend's mom. Divorced. Older. Everything society would quietly insist shouldn't happen. And yet, there was a warmth in the ordinary moment that felt like permission. My mind wandered. What if this stretched beyond coffee? What if the quiet intensity in her eyes meant more than polite gratitude? I offered to help carry her bag when she stood to leave, and our hands brushed. Just the edge, nothing deliberate. My chest jerked like I'd been punched lightly. She didn't comment. She only let her fingers linger a fraction longer than necessary. "You always notice the small things," she said, half joking, half serious, and I realized she might have been talking about me all this time. The way I folded napkins, the way I'd watched her laugh at nothing. She paused near the door, glancing at me over her shoulder. Something in that look stopped me. Something that didn't belong to friendship. Something that wasn't explanation, but acknowledgement. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I thought later, replaying it as I walked back upstairs. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. And even though we didn't say anything, even though our exchange could have been just mundane politeness, the brush of our fingers, the shared quiet, the way her gaze lingered, it was enough to make the air between us feel different. Charged. Unsure. I left the cafe carrying more than just the sight of her. I left with the awareness that something had shifted. A boundary, perhaps, or a fragile bridge. I didn't know which, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The secret between me and my friend's mom. Part 3. The emotional conflict unfolds. I saw her in the stairwell that evening, heading down to grab her mail. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and the late warmth of summer sun through the windows. I was leaning against my doorframe, pretending to check my phone, though I hadn't opened it. She looked up, smiled lightly. A curl at the edge of her lips, nothing exaggerated, and I felt the familiar tug in my chest. I stepped forward, almost too fast, and then stopped. Half of me wanted to say something. Half of me was terrified it would be too much, too soon. "Hey," I said, voice low, uncertain. "Hey," she replied, glancing past me, like the hallway might swallow our exchange if we lingered. We walked together for a few steps. The distance between us was small but deliberate. I wanted to close it, to let the world shrink around us. And then, a knock at her door, her neighbor, probably. She jumped slightly, murmured an apology, and hurried inside, leaving the faintest echo of her perfume behind. I stood in the hallway, heart thudding in a rhythm that felt too loud for the quiet building. Her sudden retreat left me unsteady. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. I already knew she had pulled away, just enough to make the space between us ache. Later, in the cafe the next morning, I noticed her gaze linger on my hands while I sipped coffee, but she spoke less. Her sentences trailed off mid-thought. She fiddled with her spoon, tapping it gently against the edge of the cup. I could tell she wanted to say something, maybe warn me, maybe tease, but the words never came. I imagined all sorts of scenarios, all of them wrong and right at once. Sitting too close, touching hands, saying her name out loud, feeling her pulse through the fabric of her sleeve. I imagined her leaning toward me, stopping, smiling, walking away, and in my mind, each movement felt like a confession and a withdrawal at the same time. When she asked me to help carry a stack of returned books to her car, I noticed the way her shoulder brushed mine. An accident, or maybe a test. My fingers twitched as if to linger, to hold, but I pulled back. The tension settled into my chest, thick and sweet and impossible. She paused at the door of the cafe's alley, glancing back with an expression I couldn't name. Her eyes searched mine, hesitant. I opened my mouth, words forming, and then stopped. I wanted to say something, anything, but the sound never made it out. For a heartbeat, we were close. Too close. I could feel her breath, see the almost imperceptible tilt of her head. My chest rose and fell faster, and I realized how careful she was. How careful I was. And then she smiled softly, the kind of smile that carries both reassurance and distance. She turned, stepping into the sunlight, leaving me with a taste of what could have been, a half-confession hanging in the space where nothing was said, but everything was understood. The secret between me and my friend's mom. Part 4. Maximum tension, I found her on the park bench near the old fountain, the kind that dripped more than it spurted. The afternoon was mild, sun just tilting low enough to cast long shadows over the gravel path. She was sitting stiffly, hands folded in her lap, and for the first time, she looked small, fragile in a way that made my chest tighten. "Hey," I said, settling on the edge of the bench, careful not to crowd her. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes lingered on the ripples in the water, like she was trying to read them instead of me. "I saw him today," she said finally, voice low, clipped. My stomach sank. I knew who she meant, my friend. A casual mention that felt anything but casual. "Oh," I said, letting my words trail off. She turned to me then, just a flicker of a glance, eyes sharp but unsure. "It's stupid," she whispered, shaking her head. I don't even know why it bothers me." I reached for the thermos I'd carried, pretending to pour tea, though my hands were shaking slightly. She watched, silent. I wanted to fill the silence with something. Words, excuses, explanations, but none seemed right. "You make it complicated," she admitted, almost too quietly to hear. My heart stuttered. Complicated. That word held the weight of everything unspoken. Age, roles, boundaries. Everything forbidden, and yet here it was, undeniable. Her gaze flicked toward my hands. I noticed how she leaned back slightly, small hesitation. And then, she did something that almost broke me. She let her fingers brush mine as I passed her the cup. Brief. Nothing more. Yet it carried a charge I wasn't sure I could handle. "I shouldn't feel like this," she murmured. "I know it's wrong." Her words hit harder than any accusation. I wanted to tell her it wasn't wrong. I wanted to say her name and hold her hand, to let the weight of it all collapse into something real. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in the silence, listening to the fountain, to the distant chirp of a bird, to the quiet in her chest rising and falling like mine. I almost said something earlier. I whispered, voice catching. Something I shouldn't have. She looked at me then, steady and careful. Our eyes met, and I could feel her walls trembling, even as her posture tried to stay composed. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between us. The warmth of the teacup, the faint scent of her coat, the way the sunlight caught the silver in her hair. Then she asked, softly, without looking away, "Do you feel it too?" The words hovered, unanswered, as if the next breath could undo everything or finally make it real. And I realized, sitting there, that the answer could change us forever. The secret between me and my friend's mom. Part 5. The twist. I didn't see her for a week. Not in the cafe, not in the hallways, not even when I left a note tucked into the mailbox. The first day, I thought maybe she was busy. The second day, I checked the little bench by the fountain, the one where we'd sat quietly just days ago, and it was empty. The third, I felt the oddest sort of ache, a hollow, like my usual rhythm had fractured. When I finally did see her, she looked different, distant, polished in a way that made me notice every careful gesture. The way she folded her scarf, the way her eyes flicked toward me and then immediately away. I wanted to ask what happened. I wanted to ask why, but I didn't. At first, I thought it was me. Too forward, too eager, too something. But then I overheard her on the phone, the kind of quiet conversation you catch just enough of to feel guilty for listening. "He doesn't understand. I can't explain everything right now." My stomach tightened. The voice wasn't harsh, but there was weight. Something unshared, something heavy. I imagined the possibilities, an ex showing up, obligations I didn't know, a child waiting at home. My mind spun little scenes, her laughing somewhere else, forgetting to text, brushing off moments we could have had. I caught myself at the cafe, staring at the empty chair across from me, and realized I'd been holding my breath without noticing. When I finally summoned the courage to send a message, I stopped mid-typing. "Hey, everything okay?" The cursor blinked at me, impatient and silent. I deleted it. Then I tried again later. Deleted. Each attempt felt like crossing a line I couldn't undo, like pressing on a door that might never open. I kept imagining her, moving through her world without me in it. Hope collided with confusion. I pictured the faintest brush of her hand, the fleeting glance from the stairwell, and then nothing. Withdrawal. a sudden empty weight in the chest. I stopped showing up at the cafe at my usual time. I wandered past it, just once, catching her in the window, sitting alone, sipping coffee, eyes far away. She didn't look at me. Maybe she didn't see me. Maybe she did. And I realized something I couldn't name exactly. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I left my apartment later that evening with my phone in my hand, thumbs hovering over her contact, imagining every possible word. Are you okay? I miss you. I don't know what's happening. I shouldn't. Nothing was sent. I walked past her door, chest tight, and stopped. The mailbox creaked open, but I didn't knock. I didn't leave a note. I only looked at the faint light spilling from her window and wondered what unseen weight kept her from me. And then I went upstairs, alone, carrying all the quiet tension with me, the empty chair at the cafe still lingering in my mind like a ghost. I found her in the kitchen of her apartment, early evening light spilling through the blinds. The faint smell of simmering vegetables hung in the air, the hum of the refrigerator low and steady. I hadn't knocked. I'd just stepped inside, unsure if I had permission or if I was crossing some invisible line. She looked up from chopping onions, startled, then softened when she recognized me. "Simon," she said, voice quiet, almost a question. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, feeling the familiar tug in my chest, the one that never seemed to weaken, even after all the hesitation and empty days. I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, almost shyly, as if admitting it out loud cost her more than she wanted to show. I took a step closer, noticing the way her sleeve fell loosely around her wrist. My throat tightened. I didn't know if I should. She stopped chopping, hands frozen on the knife and cutting board. The moment stretched, quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the fridge. I could feel the weight of every unspoken word, every small gesture we had shared, every glance that lingered too long. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, voice barely above the sound of the blade hitting the board. "Scared of what it means, scared of messing everything up." I swallowed hard. My fingers twitched, wanting to reach for hers, wanting to close the space between us, but I stayed still. "I know," I whispered. "I feel that too." Her eyes searched mine, and in that look, I realized that all the weeks of uncertainty, the paused messages, the near confessions, it was all coming down to this. The choice, to speak, to risk, or to retreat. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she added softly, almost to herself, and I nodded, understanding every unspoken layer behind that fear. We moved closer, almost together, but not yet crossing the invisible line. I let my hand hover near hers, not touching, feeling the quiet ache of possibility. She did the same. Silence, full of tension, full of trust, full of everything we hadn't dared to say before. Finally, she exhaled, small, deliberate, and her fingers brushed mine lightly. Nothing dramatic, nothing hurried. Just enough. Enough to tell me she was there. Enough to tell me she trusted me. Enough to tell me I could stay. I smiled softly. She returned it, a small, human gesture. No words left hanging. No declarations, just the acknowledgement that we had found a point of fragile connection. Fragile, real, and ours alone. "Okay," she said quietly, and I felt the words settle between us. Not the end, not the answer to everything, but a start. And for the first time in a long while, the tension in my chest eased, just a little, as if letting the quiet human connection exist was enough. It was 8:47 a.m. when I walked past the cafe again, the one with chipped counters and a playlist that never changed. She was already there, black coffee in hand, reading a book I hadn't seen before. She glanced up and caught my eye, a small nod, and I felt the familiar tug, soft now, not sharp. We didn't rush anything. Some mornings I stopped in for coffee, others I didn't. Sometimes we sat at the same bench by the fountain, letting the world drift around us without comment. The sunlight slanted just so over the gravel, just like the first time we'd sat there together. She told me one afternoon about an old photograph she'd found of herself and my friend when he was 6. Her voice was calm, reflective. I listened, laughing quietly at small details, feeling a rhythm of shared moments build between us. No confessions, no heavy declarations, just the kind of intimacy that grows in silence and observation. Life didn't change in big gestures. We still had routines, still had errands, still had obligations. But the small, human things, shared tea, the tilt of her head when she noticed I'd remembered her favorite pastry, the way our fingers brushed while passing a plate, those were enough. They were heavy with meaning, delicate in their quietness. Once, I left a note tucked into her mailbox. Coffee, 9 a.m.? She responded with a post-it on my door. See you there. That was our language, simple, unspoken, earned through patience and careful noticing. There were mornings when she'd fold her napkin under her cup exactly how she did the first time I noticed. I'd watch her hands, just as I did then, and smile quietly to myself. She noticed too, and our eyes met, both aware of the memory tucked into the gesture. We didn't need to explain what we were or why. The age gap, the whispered guilt, the near misses, all of that had folded into the life we now shared, without fanfare or flourish. And sometimes, when the cafe was quiet, I'd catch her watching me over the rim of her mug. I'd see the faintest flicker of warmth, a trace of laughter, the same quiet acknowledgement that had begun months ago. That was our secret, ordinary, deliberate, deeply human. One evening, as the sun slanted gold across the floorboards of her apartment, she handed me a thermos of tea, the steam curling between us. I traced the rim with my thumb, feeling her hand brush mine. She didn't say anything, but I didn't need her to. I thought, quietly, as the world carried on outside the window, some love isn't loud. Some love isn't declared. It's folded into coffee cups, the way hands meet over a counter, the timing of a glance. And I understood, only us, how everything had finally settled, small, real, and enough.